if God is love, and if the summary of the commandments in Christian practice is to love God with all your heart, to love God and to love your neighbour as yourself, then theology is also words about love.
What is it that you're trying to communicate in music? Is there something, is there a reality underneath the words? What is there that you're trying to communicate that music can take up and communicate? I think that's really exciting.
Composers and musicians have been described as the midwives of faith, bringing something to the expression of Scripture and indeed the expression of prayer through organised sound, which opens a window on the divine.
TheoArtistry is a new dimension of the work of ITIA, the Institute for Theology, Imagination and the Arts, based here in the School of Divinity, the University of St Andrews. And TheoArtistry explores how our research at the interface between theology and the arts might inform directly the making, the practice, the performance, the curatorship, the reception of Christian art, and transform not only the scholarly but the public perception of the role and the vital importance today of the arts in theology, in church practice, and in society at large. The theme of our first cycle of projects is Annunciations, though not just the Annunciation, because we want to explore over these 2, 3, 4 years how God reveals. So not just what God reveals, but how God reveals, to explore the moments in which and the ways in which God speaks to mankind. There are 2 interrelated TheoArtistry musical projects this year, 2016 to 17. The TheoArtistry Composers Scheme is exploring how our research might animate, might stimulate, might inform. We're not quite sure how these partnerships are going to work. The composition of new works for chapel choir, and a collaboration between our institute, ITIA, and St Salvator's Chapel Choir, directed by Tom Wilkinson. For the TheoArtistry Composers Scheme, we selected 6 doctoral theologians in the Institute for Theology, Imagination and the Arts, or School of Divinity, and we also selected 6 exceptionally talented composers. And what we asked the theologians to do initially was to prepare, to research the Old Testament Annunciation, to look at the biblical passage in its context, to look at the commentary tradition, to look at the reception in different artistic media, to think about possible clusters of passages that could be set to music.
That's an introduction to the episode and so on. Still again, what I heard for. This is about a manager.
So at this symposium, what we're hoping to do is for the theologians to share all their research with the composers, and then enter into a dialogue, into a discussion. And after the symposium, they're going to have at least 3 meetings, maybe in person, probably by Skype for many of them, where they're developing the partnership. And then it's up to the composer to take that material, to engage with it, and to compose a piece for St Salvator's Chapel Choir.
discussion, the dialogue between theology and the arts is not some peripheral thing that some have claimed it has been, but it actually might be a very central thing in the development of the way that we think of our culture as we go forward. And therefore the encouragement of those younger figures, especially composers, who may feel the same way but don't necessarily get the encouragement in the wider culture, is very important for an institute like this.
It was really great just this morning to hear the panel speak, because they really want to encourage experimentation with the text and the text setting, and it was great to hear that.
How is one true to a narrative of an event?
It's been a delight, because a lot of the things that I know, or the concepts that I'm kind of familiar with about Christianity, have been very piecemeal. They've been kind of given to me via, Christmas carols, or fragments at Easter, or whatever it might be. And I've always had an interest in it, and it's fantastic to have the opportunity to work with someone that really knows what they're talking about.
It's been nice to take a step back and look at the bigger picture again, and kind of return to that with a kind of blank slate, look at it afresh, especially when you're introducing it to somebody who doesn't necessarily have much biblical background, and so that there are very few preconceptions that might cloud how you're trying to look at a particular passage.
I think it'll just be fun, really. And just progress the ideas, learn some more. It's stimulating, interesting. It's topics I'm really interested in. Just see what happens.
Way back when I was first doing my master's degree here at St Andrews in ITIA, my friend had an interesting hobby which involved spinning fire, and he persuaded me to give it a go, and it's actually informed my whole research career from that point, which is a strange kind of reflection, because what does fire have to do with theology? Well, it turns out fire can have quite a lot to do with theology. And even just looking at the Hebrew Bible texts, even just looking at the one text that we have, the burning bush, there are so many possible readings of that. There's so many kind of points of interaction for an artist, I think, and for the theologian, to look at why God might have identified with the fire, what Moses might have understood in that encounter with the fire, and the bush that doesn't get consumed by it. And there have been reflections in my own fire spinning where the fire kind of behaves a bit differently than maybe you'd expect at times. It doesn't kind of go out as soon as you're expecting, or maybe it goes out later than you're expecting. It interacts with the environment in a very non-human way, but a way in which I, as a human, can kind of interact with as well.
It was really amazing to watch, actually. It was sort of like Tai Chi or contemporary dance. I was expecting it, I don't know quite what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting it to be so smooth and fluid, and it was quite hypnotic to watch, actually.
So bringing that kind of creative perspective into reading this text of what is Moses thinking or what is Moses experiencing perhaps, this unpredictable elemental force that is both relatable as a presence that, you know, we have to respond to it, we have to respect it, we have to understand that it's doing its own thing according to its own rules. So being able to draw together kind of my creative interest in fire and my academic interest in fire, and have that meet with Carenza's musical interest in fire, which hadn't even occurred to me at that point, was this whole kind of crucible, if you like, of ideas, of experiences, and hopefully out of that crucible we're going to get this piece that will prompt this further kind of thinking, this further dialogue, and probably feed back into how I relate to fire as a whole.
So now the compositions are in. Tom Wilkinson has started rehearsing them with the choir, and we're looking forward to hearing them on Sunday.
The curious thing about these 6 works is that they're not necessarily written for liturgy as such, and this is the wider issue. You know, what is sacred music? Is it music for worship, or does it have a place in the secular world as well? Well, it's both. Sometimes liturgical music needs to be shaped in a particular way. It's got to be a vehicle for prayer, that is the prayers of those people present. But composers can have a concept of sacred music which is not beholden to liturgy. And there are things in these scores, for example, these 6 works on Sunday, which on the face of it don't look particularly liturgical. So maybe some of the composers are thinking out of the box, thinking about the wider theological implications that are not necessarily just focused on worship.
I mean, the theme of the disc, as we said, is Annunciations, and that, of course, refers to a communication from God to man, and the ways that that's been portrayed in these different pieces is fascinating.
The piece is based around the idea of Annunciation and God speaking to man and revealing himself to man, and then man responding with, "Here I am." So in this case, Adam and Eve in the garden, we decided that we wanted to do a almost role reversal, so you have a reverse Annunciation. So we begin in the garden with Adam and Eve, and God asking them the questions of, "Where are you? Who told you you were naked? What is this you've done? Have you eaten from the tree?" And throughout, as the text develops, that becomes reversed, and you realise that actually Adam and Eve are asking God these questions, but it's become about the cross. So, what are you doing, God? Why are you naked? Why are you on a tree? And then they realise that it's for them. And so God ends up identifying himself to them by saying, "Hineni," which means, "Here I am."
There is value and something positive in the modern composer being able to embrace such a wealth of tradition, but also a wealth of stimulus from various different parts of the globe and from different aspects of culture.
what I found really powerful was that although each of the 6 composers had a very different style in their music, you could really tangibly sense the engagement with theology and the human depth that engagement had brought forth in the music. This wasn't just notes on a page, this was music which spoke to the heart.
My analogy is that traditions are rivers which run through history, irrigating human experience at any given point of history. And if you put a dam in that river, you desiccate life. You stop the irrigation. And that was one of the negative fallouts, the negative consequences of revolutionary modernism that tried to stop the influence of the past. Let's take the dam away. Let's let tradition flow, and that river is an onward going thing. It has a past, but it also has a future and a present, and it can indeed irrigate human experience at any given time of history.
We had many conversations about the different meanings behind the text, and also a particularly interesting thing was different translations of the text. So in the original we were given, it might talk about the still small voice of God, but in other translations there was a mentioning of silence, or of a gentle murmuring, or a gentle breeze, and we thought that this was interesting, that it was different. So I decided to incorporate sort of breath noises, sounds of not singing but like breathing sounds, to kind of represent that.
I think it's been a very valuable experience, and yeah, I would absolutely want to try and investigate these things again.
The ability to step out of this academic context where you're constantly writing about art, and to actually interact with an artist in creating a piece of art, and seeing how the medium informs the ideas that you're trying to present, and how those theological ideas also inform the medium, I think is a really invaluable opportunity.
It's been a really enjoyable process, and I'd really like to have a kind of permanent theologian actually just help me with all of my pieces.
Absolutely, I would do it again in the future. And Anselm's quite eager to do it in the future as well, do it again in the future and do a longer composition. So I think he's really found the partnership to be helpful and fruitful, which is very encouraging. And I think any time that we can take what we're writing about and turn it into something that can engage with more people in different ways is brilliant. So I think we need to consciously keep that in the front of our mind always as theologians.
It would, yeah, I really enjoyed working with Stuart, and part of the important thing about this project has been having more contacts.
And that gives me inspiration and excitement going forward, because I think it's shown that collaborations between theologians and composers really do work, really do lead to not just new music or new art, but art which has a depth which comes from that tradition. And going forward, we really want to open up ITIA, the Institute for Theology, Imagination and the Arts, the School of Divinity, to practicing artists, whether Christian or not, and say, look, come to us, and we are a resource which you can use and draw upon.
And I'd really love to do it again.
The next time I compose a sacred choral piece, I'm going to be expecting a theologian to do an exegesis beforehand.